4-8 doesn't sound too impressive. Of course, that was USC's mark last year. That was also Rice's record, 4-8. But the first time they cracked 3 wins since 2015, they haven't won more than they've lost since a bowl victory and an 8-5 record in 2014. We got Steve Helwick on the line from SB Nation's Underdog Dynasty to talk up some Rice Owls football for us. Steve, how you doing?
I'm doing excellent. Just tuned in and heard you and Matt talking USC football this year, and I'm excited for this game around the corner. I'm about to fly out to LA to experience the atmosphere there for my first time. So really looking forward to the California weather and the California atmosphere there.
Taking in double duty, correct, Steve, with UCLA and USC?
Yes, UCLA Bowling Green in the morning and Pacific time, and then going about 30 minutes across downtown to get to the LA Coliseum to go to Rice USC.
What are you looking forward to in this game, Steve? What are some tension points, plot points that you are focused on in terms of like studying this game, studying the Trojans, studying what Rice brings to the table and how this game's going to evolve?
Well, it was just brought up in Mike Bloomgren's press conference that Rice has really surprised some teams in covering the spread early on and playing really well in their openers lately. In 2019, against an Army team coming off an excellent season, that Army was coming off that 70-14 win over Houston. They barely beat Rice 14-7 that year. Then last year, Arkansas, they storm into Arkansas. Right. They hold a 17-7 lead in the middle of that third quarter over a Razorback team that eventually finished 9-4. So Rice has been able to start well against marquee opponents on their schedule lately. Now, this is a different animal in USC, and this USC team is very hard to it's hard to predict because there's so many moving parts. Like every skill position player on offense that's going to start is from another school. We haven't seen this unit together. It's like a bunch of free agents assembled at once. So it's very hard to get a good grip, a good read on this USC team, which is, I think, something that Rice is having trouble in film study because you're studying guys that are coming from Pitt, from Colorado, from Stanford, from Oklahoma, all different places. And there's also a few starters on defense, too. You're looking at guys from Auburn and Colorado, and there's just so many different players that have assembled into this one USC team. So it's a really unique college football squad to watch out for in 2022.
So if you're Rice's offensive coordinator, how do you start this game? How do you attack USC's, vulnerable, limited defense? Where do you go first in terms of pressure points?
And their offensive coordinator is pretty familiar with Pac-12 country. That's Marquez Tuiasosopo, former Washington Husky quarterback and played for the Oakland Raiders and New York Jets. And attacking the USC defense, Rice always says they love to pound the rock and control the clock, and that is their number one strategy. That is how they beat a number 15 ranked Marshall team in the 2020 season, was they just basically ate up the entire time of possession. They finished top 10 in possession last year, as they do in most years in the Bloomgren era, and it's a very similar style to those Stanford offenses that you would see when Mike Bloomgren was there in the mid-2010s. So they're going to want to run the football really well, but in my opinion, I think that Rice's strong point in the offense is the receivers now. This is the most loaded receiving group that Rice has had in the Mike Bloomgren era. They get Brad Rosner, who was their star receiver in 2019. He comes back after playing 2 quarters in the last 2 seasons. He has had horrible injury luck, says he feels better than ever now and is ready to return to the lineup. And then Rice just got a massive haul from the transfer portal in terms of receivers. They got Isaiah Esdale from West Virginia, very experienced, had 100 yards against Texas Tech last year. You got Sam Crawford, someone who played a big role for Tulsa when Tulsa was really good in that 2020 season. And then you get Luke McCaffrey, who moves from quarterback to wide receiver, and every player and coach is saying what an incredible camp he has and what an explosive player he is. Just a natural athlete that you see in that McCaffrey family that produced Max and Christian and Ed and so many other great receivers or receiving running backs in that lineage. So I think that Rice's receiving core is stacked. They decided on Wiley Green as their starting quarterback, who has been the starter for week 1 in 2019 and in 2021. So the receivers core is going to take them as far as Wiley Green takes them. So they're going to need a big game from their quarterback.
So how do you sequence plays? Do you run to set up the pass? Do you pass to set up the run? What's your first down, second down play mixture? Any particular thoughts on that?
I'd say you'd run to set up the pass, and that's a similar approach to what they took against Arkansas last year. They played a little more conservative in the early going in that game, and once things opened up in the run game for them, they started taking a deep shots, and that's how Wiley Green connected with August Pete for that touchdown, which gave them the 17-7 lead in the third quarter. So I think that Rice needs to establish that run game first and show enough lethalness in that run game in order to open up the pass. But I think that these receivers are really good. I think that there's guys that can make plays in open space. Isaiah Esdale did a lot of that at West Virginia. And from what I've seen with Luke McCaffrey, he's somebody who you could throw on a bubble screen, a tunnel screen, and just watch him move because he moves so well in open space. So I think that it's a good substitution you can do if the run game doesn't work early on.
All right. Now, one of the big questions with the USC roster, rush end, the edge rusher on the outside, Corey Foreman's been injured, his progress has been slowed and limited. Romello Height, another rush end, transfer from Auburn. He's been dinged up a little bit, hasn't had, maximum participation throughout August camp. So how do Rice's offensive tackles shape up on the edge, providing pass protection, against USC's a USC pass rush core that, has a lot to prove and really does not enter this game in the best of situations?
Yeah, that's not the matchup I focused as much on with the offensive line versus the defensive line, because I look at a name like Tuli Tuipulotu in the middle there, and Rice's best linemen are all on the interior. So that's where the marquee matchup is on the offensive line. But the outsides, you get a West Virginia transfer and John Hughes, who's going to start at right tackle, and then Clay Servin, a longtime tenured Rice player, who's going to start at left tackle. Rice didn't have the best pass protection last year, but with full health in the offensive line, which is something that they were not given the luxury of last year, maybe they hope that the pass protection improves this year with this really veteran unit that has a ton of collegiate starts under their belt. But still, I do think that USC has a ton of athletes down there that can swarm past Rice's defenders. I think Nick Figueroa is still starting on that line, and he's a name that I look to in order to spearhead some of that pass rush for USC. So I think that Rice might struggle a little bit in this area still, even with USC being a little dinged up.
Steve, of course, in USC camp, among the fans, especially in a week in which they're playing Rice, there's always an eye on a few other programs, and UCLA's near the top of that list, if not at the top. So since you're going out to cover both games and both teams this weekend, what's your initial thought about the Bruins possibly competing in the Pac-12?
Well, I actually picked. Okay, don't get mad at me, USC fans in here. I just don't know enough about this USC team yet to know if they're going to the Pac-12 championship game. I think Utah's great, and I picked UCLA as the other team to make the Pac-12 championship in there.
That's worse. That's worse than not picking USC. It's that you are picking UCLA.
Yeah, I'm not usually controversial. I don't usually like to throw myself into the fire, but
you make an exception out of USC. Yeah, nice.
I do like the makeup of this UCLA team because I have more certainty. I like to base things on what I've seen already. And I've seen this UCLA team have the 11th best rushing attack in college football. And you have guys returning from that. You have DTR remaining at quarterback for his fourth and a half straight year as a starter there. And just like USC, this is a team that really loaded on the defensive side of the ball with transfers, getting Gabriel Murphy, who was a really talented pass rusher at North Texas. He's someone who can really spearhead that pass rush there at UCLA. So UCLA went 8-4 last year, and I think that they can build on. I like them building on just the good season that they had already under Chip Kelly. And they were a couple close losses away from maybe even getting 10 wins. That game against Oregon late in there, and that Fresno State game where Jake Haener just had his late game heroicism where he threw the game-winning touchdown injured. So I do think that UCLA is going to be a very good team this year. But I did hear your point earlier before I came on that there are a lot of weak teams in the Pac-12 this year. And I think that Utah, UCLA, and USC should probably separate from the rest of the bunch. I'm still not really sold on Oregon with how much talent that they have to replace at the moment. So
Mark knows I'm not sold on Oregon either.
I do not believe in the Ducks right now. So I think I believe more in USC than Oregon with all their incoming talent. But I do like the makeup of the Bruins this year just because of their returning talent. I like their run game a lot, and I think they can build off of what they accomplished last year in their first winning season under Chip Kelly.